Well, welcome back to our work. Our guest today is Gregg Bamford, who is a real estate professional, a team leader for Bamford & Co., and the co-founder and chair of an organization called One Small Step. So we're not going to talk too much about real estate today.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah, we're actually here to talk about Gregg's commitment and all of the work that you do in the community. You know, on your website, it says that you're involved in other organizations, including Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Sanctum Care Group, and Kinsman Club. A lot of the work that you've done in the community, you're so humble, but it's been recognized by some organizations. You won the Canadian Realtors Association Care Award in 2021, as well as the B'nai Birth Award in 2021 as well.
Yes.
Yeah, awesome. So I just wanted to set up a little bit of how powerful some of this work is that you're doing in the community.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, it's, I never really saw it coming. You know what I mean? Like you kind of like just do this and it's this gradual thing to where once you do one thing, you can start seeing that you can make changes in other ways, right? And so it's been a journey.
So where I wanted to start this conversation and you and I chatted about this previously, is I personally feel a lot work that you're really, really passionate about, in this case, the community for you, is usually a product of some childhood experiences that have kind of like influenced the lens in which you see the world. And you're so focused on community. So I was just hoping you were willing to share a little bit about some of your childhood experiences that helped you shape your commitment to this particular work in the community.
For sure. First off, thanks for having me. I appreciate you highlighting One Small Step and the work that needs to be done, I think, for all of us to be part of. My childhood, I had mom and dad, two brothers, a loving home. I grew up being diagnosed with ADHD. So I had my own struggles, I guess, learning how that kind of affected me and how to go about, I guess, life, right? And I think back in the day, I think I got diagnosed. So I had a ton of energy all the time. And I mean, I'm out there enjoying life, but I think I got diagnosed when we moved. So I was born in Saskatoon and then we moved to St. Albert and then Ontario. So when I was in Bradford, I think I got diagnosed when I was about 8 years old. My schooling, I remember it's either I really got along with the teachers or I hung out in the principal's office, the library, or even kind of, I do remember being tied to my desk in the hallway and kind of being like, but just thinking that was kind of normal, right? And it was very hard for me to concentrate. And I mean, unless you're ADHD, you don't really understand what it's like when you're a kid trying to figure out your journey and so forth. A lot of times you're called stupid, retarded. It's kind of interesting when you think about it, when you look back at these kids.
Mm-hmm. Just little kids, right? And we're labeling them.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, you never know what you're really struggling with and so forth because you feel adequate, but you just don't know what other people are, right? Like, and so like it was interesting. I was lucky. I was good at sports. So when you're good at sports, you can kind of like push through a lot of things differently because you might not be that great in school or so forth. Like I was always great at problem solving, but at like the sitting down and the attention span and so forth, it just wasn't there. And I mean, some teachers were absolutely amazing and you remember those teachers and you got along with them. Mm-hmm. So my mom always said, like, if we had a babysitter, if they brought a book, my mom thought this isn't going to go well. But if they brought a ball, then she knew that it was going to be amazing. And It's either the person with the book said, Mrs. Bamford, just, you know what, you don't need to pay me. Just don't ever ask me to come back again. Or it's that like the person that came with the ball was like, you know what, I had a blast. You don't need to pay me. Right. So it was like we had, so I had two brothers. I'm the oldest. Yeah, so that was kind of my journey through, I guess, elementary school and so forth. So just finding where I was at. The thing with being ADHD is that your mind never turns off. So it's interesting. So if you can use it and you can hyperfocus, I mean, it's a weapon, right? Yeah. And you can really use it to build out stuff and so forth. But if you're not focused on it and you're wanting to mute it, then it's like, how do you mute it, right?
And I'm not very familiar with ADHD. Right. I know now that there's medication. Right. I have a friend who takes medication regularly. Yeah. Was there medication available at that time?
There was medication. I didn't take it the way that I should have been taking it and so forth. But when I did take it, what it basically does is it numbs you, right? So it numbs you and then you have no appetite.
And you lose your superpower.
You do. At the same time, you don't realize you have a superpower because the schools aren't set up for people with what they call learning disabilities, right? So if you have autism or if you have ADHD or anything else, they're not set up. They're set up for basically memory and not problem solving or creativity or so forth, right? At least that's the way I see it. I mean, now they're changing a little bit, but I don't think school is set up that way. I think in different countries, it actually, once they figure out what somebody's interested in, then schooling leads them in that direction. Here it's like, no, this is what you're set up for, this is what you need to do,
Yeah.
and so forth.
It's cookie cutter. We're pushing all these different shapes into a square peg.
Yeah,
Like,
it is.
yeah.
So what I found, I saw a video the other day and I found it interesting, and they were said, you know, all those kids, when the ones that are the mischievous ones or can't sit still and the rest of them have such hard time with school, as soon as you take them out into the outdoors and into the rest of it, they become the leaders. And then then everybody else starts following them because now they're in their place that they excel at, right?
Yeah. And then they build confidence and they
100%.
find their own Yeah.
Yeah. So interesting. So I mean, I have to say my schooling went into finding drugs, finding alcohol. Then it went into not being successful in school, and then I ended up at so I went to Cross, then Bowman, got kicked out of Bowman, went to Nutana, and then I went back to Bowman, and then got kicked out again for more attendance side of things, and then I went off to Nutana, and so to be honest, like it was hard. Like I never even thought I'd finish high school, which is kind of weird to say now because I run a good business and I mean I do all these other things, but like back then, but I mean also a lot of people just said like you can't do it, right? And so I think my mom was always there and always backing me up. Did an IQ test on me when I was in high school to prove that I was smart and so forth, because I mean sometimes it's just you're just told something different and sometimes the narrative. So when I look at kids and so forth, I was like, I guess my passion has always been that like I think every kid deserves an opportunity. And I think that's kind of where I guess my journey started with volunteering, because I looked at it as like kids are awesome in there. I mean, to be honest, they're a blank canvas and they just see the best in the world, right? And I think as we in society kind of lead them, they say that kids are geniuses until they are like something like 6 or 7 years old, but we take it out of them.
Yeah, we taint them.
Yeah.
Yeah, we tell them what's good and bad. We tell them what's acceptable, what's unacceptable. We tell them the right ways to think, the wrong ways to act, and like, yeah, we
Right.
condition them.
Yeah, so that was kind of my schooling. So then I actually graduated 2 years later than I should have. So the same year that my brother Kevin did, and I graduated valedictorian at Nutana. And so I guess I just saw things a lot different than a lot of people, and met a lot of different people that I probably wouldn't have met if I was in, I guess, Aiden Bowman, right? Aiden Bowman was like an academic school and so forth. I had a lot of friends that I grew up playing hockey with and so forth that went to the school. But when I went to Nutana, there was just people from all, like either people upgrading or people from all different sides of the city. I met some of my First Nations friends or Métis, right? And so not thinking anything of it then, but I mean, it's led me different paths now going into the future.
So you're talking about really like diversity of backgrounds, diversity of experiences versus maybe a little bit more of a homogenous type of student, or at least socioeconomic status for some of the students at your previous high school.
Right.
And do you remember it's hard to kind of picture yourself at 18, 17, 18, 19, but do you remember some of those differences or things like those moments that you're like, wow, people live differently or have had a different upbringing or a different experience than me?
I think sometimes there was like some, I guess women or girls, I guess, that were probably 14 and 15 and they had kids. And so we had a daycare at Nutana. And so I looked at that differently. I mean, a lot of these people work really hard to try to get through school. I was being pushed to go to school.
Right.
Right. On the other side, these people were just trying to get out from where they were and trying to go to school and have kids and so forth. So I really noticed where other people were coming from, because I mean, it was way different than where I came from.
So having those experiences took you right to your work in the community. Do you remember your first kind of step into community work?
For sure. So I remember being very hungover at church one day, and that's just being honest, because that's how I remember, and sitting at the back of church, and Louise Carroll was talking at church about an after-school program at the bridge on 20th Street. Just I felt like I needed to go up there, even though like I kind of was torn because it was like I have to admit I was a little hungover, and then at the same time it just felt like it was the right thing to do. And I've always loved kids just because I mean they're just so innocent and they're cool and they're fun and no judgment, right? And so then that was I guess the first step was that it was just going and volunteering there, and it wasn't organized, and it was just I mean it was like doing water balloon fights and just doing fun stuff with the kids, right? And so then I ran into I don't know if it was Bob Fawcett, and talked me into being a coach for Kinsman Hockey League. And there, then I got placed at the King George School, and so I was there for 13 years. And but yeah, so that was kind of like how I transitioned into that. But then that also then led into doing Wake Ride and raising money for Core Neighborhood Kids, and then being on the board for Haven Family Connections. And then also then Caitlin Roberts, which I mean, there's probably people in my life that have taught me more than anything, right? So it's a basically on a journey of learning, and I think Caitlin Roberts was one of those people. She was a social worker, and her and Heather Carter was doing hampers at Christmas, and asked if I would do a hamper, and then ended up that I started helping her, and then we grew a hamper program, Operation Santa, that went to probably before COVID 200 to 300 families a year, and I dressed up as Santa Claus and she dressed up as an elf, and it made Christmas awesome, right? And it's like, and it also made all the families that were adopting, it gave them something to look forward to because their kids got to pick out the presents, and so it's just not about what we get, it's about giving to other people, right?
Favorite experience throughout all that? Although Santa and the elf thing sounds pretty interesting, but
I mean, if you look at the different, like, there's just so many different things that we did. Like, I mean, everything I've done, we've had a team of people, right? Like, I mean, Kara Lackey, I mean, if we're ever doing an event, she's always been part of it in some way. And so then you build all these community friends, which I call my community friends, right? And you build all these friends, which then you just keep on kind of doing things together. My thought on it is just trying to share with my sphere of influence what they're all doing so that more impact can be made, because they're doing amazing work, and it's not about anything of what I'm doing, it's about what are they doing and how can we support their work. Like all these people that work at all these like charities and nonprofits, I mean, they're underpaid, they're probably more caring and loving than any people out there, and they're passionate about what they do, right? And so I guess like when you got people like that are sharing their insights and stuff with me, then what can I do to then help and support them, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where I've always came at it. So it's like, but they're all friends. So then you build these friendships, and then you just kind of try to do it as a team.
Yeah. So you built a community.
Yeah, and I guess the community keeps on growing, right? And it's like, and I mean, I think the one question you asked me too is like, how did it get into the homeless side of things, right?
Yeah.
I've done a lot of different things and supported charities, but I didn't see it from the person that was going to those charities, right? So, so the homeless challenge basically, Caitlin Roberts thought up, and it was basically living like you're homeless for 36 hours.
Okay.
So basically, you're given like 13 or 14 tasks a day. You're giving like your health. So I had like the first time I had AIDS, and then I had diabetes. So now I have to make sure that I'm not eating stuff that I can't when you have diabetes, and doing that when you're homeless is pretty hard because everything is sugar and so forth.
Yeah.
And then it's like you have to then go to the food bank, and you have to go to the Friendship Inn, and then you have to do all these different factors that you would never think a homeless person's doing, right?
Right.
How do you wash your laundry? Where are you going to sleep tonight?
For the homeless challenge, so Caitlin put this on, and it was specifically a challenge or an experience to get people to have the other side. Like the intention behind the challenge was for people to have that experience.
Two factor. One is to raise money for Sanctum.
Okay.
So every single person that did the challenge would raise $20,000, and then so it's kind of funny because you take, and everybody prior to me was, I mean, I looked at as like real leaders and had higher profiles, right? You had like CEOs of Nutrien, you had like the police chief, the fire chief, you had all these different people that were
Right.
like the president of the university. These were people that were coming there. And I think the idea is that if you can get people that have these leadership roles within the community to see things differently, because usually everybody beneath them is there to protect them in their kind of their glass box a little bit.
Yeah.
And so we as humans, and until we take off our caps of who we are in society and the rest of it, and we then put on some other donated clothes and we go into the community like not like ourselves, like in as something else. Because like if I walk into a place, I might have friends and so forth, but here it's like you're stripped of who you are.
Yeah.
And I think it's the vulnerability of being able to do it.
Yeah. No support system, no cell phone, no person
So
you
we
could
so
call.
we have a cell phone just to be able to share this our interactions and so forth, to be able to collect money and the rest of it, but it's not to communicate or and so forth. And I mean, they call it the homeless challenge. I mean, I think that or there's called the survivor challenge. I call it like, I mean, we're just seeing a glimpse into somebody's life. And but I think it makes such a big factor. I don't know how many people don't cry because they're seeing things differently than they ever have. And
Yeah.
when you see, I think my biggest factor is when I saw kids lined up at the food bank, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, they got 25,000 people a month that go to the food bank.
And little kids, right?
And
Like,
you
yeah.
just, yeah,
Yeah, that's a tough one.
yeah.
Yeah, that's
And
a really
then
tough one to swallow.
eating at the Friendship Inn, you see like families lined up there and kids and so forth, and that's just their normal routine, right? And so when you're actually going and doing all these things, you're going in and meeting with everybody that are these front like care workers and so forth, you just see it totally different, right? And the thing is like, I mean, and the crazy thing was a lot of these friends I used to go to high school with, right? So like there's a couple of times where it actually caught friends off guard because they're like Greg, and I'm
Like,
just
what are
like,
you
yeah,
doing here?
yeah, basically. And I was like, oh, I'm doing this home challenge. And they're like, oh, phew, okay, good. But it could be me, right? I mean, there's a lot of friends that I've went to school with and known over the times that I could be where they are. So I mean, I don't pass any judgment on someone that's an alcoholic or a drug addict or anything else because
Mhm.
I could easily be there as well too, right? And I
Right.
think that we don't sometimes in society realize how easy it would be for one of us to get there.
Sorry, we weren't planning to talk about this, but I'm just thinking about it because it's that like, people don't think that it could happen to them. People think that we're removed from it. And that's what I find like shocking sometimes is the whole like, okay, like we can't build a shelter here and we can't have a community aid organization here because of the optics and it's going to inconvenience local residents, like that whole rhetoric. Not in our backyard is what I call that rhetoric,
I
right? Like, what do you think about that?
well, it's like I wear a couple different caps, right? And the thing is like I see it from a real estate point of view.
Mhm.
Um, uh, a shelter going in across from your house isn't good for resale.
No.
Um, but then I also see the human side of it, and the thing is that if we had more money into creating smaller places and safe places for people that had more support, we wouldn't have these super shelters
Right.
or these larger places, right? And I think that like Sanctum has, they have a hospice kind of or a smaller hospice with less people, and then they're more supported, and they have care workers and mental health and so forth.
Yeah.
I think mental health is a huge thing. I mean, I will give a shout out to Dion Mazdik Shields because when I was going to do this challenge, at first when Caitlin asked me, so I did, I think it was the third year, I was like, oh, this is going to be a cakewalk. And then all of a sudden, then, I mean, my mind, because the way I think, just I started overthinking it. And I was like, oh shit. I was like, this is going to be different than what yeah, it's easy to spend 36 hours doing something. It's what you see while doing it. So
Yes.
I reached out to Dion and I didn't know why homelessness existed. So the thing is, like, we all make judgments and so forth
Yeah.
of like homelessness
Yeah.
and the rest of it.
Like somebody made a bad decision, someone failed along the way in
Right.
order to end up on the streets. That's the lens. Yeah.
For sure. I mean, one number, I think it's like 60%, if not more, of foster care of people graduating out of foster care end up homeless. because they don't have supports, right? Mental health, addictions, a lot of it comes from trauma, right? And then trauma and then drug abuse and then kind of leads into different things as well too.
Right.
I didn't understand all these things and didn't know it. So weirdly, I grew up in Saskatoon. I sold real estate. I did all this charity work and the rest of it and didn't know why homelessness existed and didn't know what 90% of these charities ever did and supported.
Right.
And so it was eye-opening on that fact. And so when I look at it, it's like we all have a story that nobody knows, right? I mean, your experiences in your life, which become your truth, you believe they're the right things. But I mean, what I've realized is that I believe they were right until I started listening to other people where they came from. And I'm realizing, like, if I grew up on the different side of the city, or if I grew up in a different country, my viewpoints would be different.
Right.
If my parents weren't there, if maybe my mom was an alcoholic, you know what I mean? Like all these different factors. And so now I look at the story of what it took. So when I see somebody on the streets, I'm like, what's their story? Like, how did they get here?
You got curious.
Like what happens, right? And so, so it's just been eye-opening. It changed my life. The crazy thing is there's more community in the homeless than there is in the rest of our society. So I found that like homeless people, like actually, like even though they're living on the streets, they support each other and they give each other the last dollar and the rest of it, or share food and the rest of it, right? And I think from 2018, and then I did the challenge again in 2022. So that was the winter edition. It's way worse.
It's the homelessness.
The homelessness, I think just, it's not all about the homelessness. It's about how many people are we supporting. So the homeless is just showing us how bad it's getting worse, but I'm just saying, like, there's that many more families that are just getting by,
right,
that have a roof over their head and so forth, that aren't fully eating in a week and the rest of it, right? So when I was on the board for the kids' house, there's a lot of families now showing up to drop their kids off at the kids' house. Haven Family Connections has 3 programs, but one of the programs is Haven Kids House, and that's a shelter for kids that are infants till 12. And so it's a place that families can go when they're in crisis, or when they just need support, right? So when they're in a place. And so there is families that drop their kids off at the end of the month because they don't have food to feed their kids.
Oh, wow.
And so there's just one example of all these things. And the thing is, we don't have enough spaces to be able to, and I say have because I used to be on the board for 9 years, but so it's just one of those things that the homeless is getting worse, but everything is.
There's like the Band-Aid aspect of a lot of these issues, right? It's like the roof over the short-term or long-term roof over the head, food to eat, that type of support. Like, to me, those are very like short-term, like basic necessities.
Right.
And then there's like the ability for these children and these people to like find a way to not just survive, but really thrive and move forward and heal their addictions and face their traumas and things like that, right? Like, is there enough support for some of these folks to like, that are beyond just the basics, to get that extra step to kind of change their situation or circumstance?
Not a chance.
Yeah.
I mean, so if you've got, like, let's say 12 people that are in business and professional writers and so forth, if we go out to do these challenges that we do in this homeless challenge and we can't find ways for the support, like, how can you expect someone else to be able to do this, right? Like, we went, for example, I walked from 20th Street to 33rd. I had COB or whatever, and you're breathing through a straw, so some infection in the lung, right?
Okay.
I'm saying it totally wrong, but I mean, so I had to breathe through the straw and stop every block. So I had to walk from 20th Street to 33rd just for someone to say, hey, we don't have any spots. Can you come back in 2 weeks? And I was like, but I'm homeless. Like, how am I supposed to come back in 2 weeks? And I don't have a phone, so how am I supposed to keep that appointment and so forth? We just launched that One Small Step podcast to interview charities. And so the one question that we're asking them is that if you had all the money in the world, where would you start? Right. And Toby was the first one. We're going to be launching that right away. And he just said, for every $1 for reactive, we need 3 for proactive care. Right. And as I was talking to this person for them, the RCMP, and it's like, it's still going to take 20 to 30 years to start seeing this pay off, right? And the thing is that we need to start now, because one comparable that someone was, we were talking about the other day, and this is the big factor that I think most people are going to be blown away about, but because it's going to affect them, they're going to have major issues. So our healthcare system right now, look at our emergencies, look at our hospitals and so forth. There's a lot of people that are moving from the rural community that are moving to Saskatoon to be closer to grandkids. They don't care about their kids. Just kidding. But they
No, I mean,
mention
it's true. It's true.
they mention their grandkids, and then they also said healthcare. So we're already pushed to the brink, and 5 to 10 years from now, with the way that the homelessness is going, the way that the care system is, it's going to be an absolute disaster. And so unless they start putting more money into it now, our parents aren't going to have the support that they're going to need to be like, they just won't have a place in the hospital. You know what? Like, I kind of sit in kind of a couple different places. One, I've got a lot of friends that are in the business world and so forth, and that's kind of like where I grew up. I got a lot of friends in the nonprofit world, and I have a lot of very respectable, cool people that have taught me a lot within the First Nations and Métis world, right?
Right.
And we're not so different. We're actually, like, a lot of times I just look at it, it's just like, we're just not listening to each other.
We all fundamentally want the same things,
Right.
but because our short-term problems are a little bit different, we're losing sight of the bigger picture. We're
For
losing
sure.
sight of the fact that we want good education, good health care, affordable living, whatever that might mean for everybody is a little bit different.
Right.
Good jobs and economy, like fundamentally, we all want the same things, which is why it completely blows me away how divided we are in our politics.
So I guess that's the question, is like, how do we become less, like, divided?
I think it's what you just said, right? We're just not listening to each other. I think we're so quick to like unfollow, to mute the person. Like, I think we're so stuck on things like the genders that kids are identifying with in high school. Like, that, for why is that the biggest political issue we have in Saskatchewan right now, blows my mind. Like, the conversation and the rhetoric over that in the last 2 years, is that really the biggest political issue we have in the province? Like, I think healthcare would be the one we want to talk about more.
I think mental health.
Yeah.
And then the healthcare system, I think, is probably one of the biggest.
Yeah. And those two are tied, really.
Yeah.
Fundamentally.
It's interesting. What I've learned by building out one small step is that if we share our truth and someone doesn't believe in it, they shut us off. And then they immediately go, I don't want to listen to that. I'm done. And then they don't talk again.
Right.
But I mean, I've shared some stuff and maybe communicated it wrong with friends, but because they're friends, they're like, well, this is how it made me feel. And I was like, oh, that's not how I meant it. It was that I read this book, so then this is what I got out of it. I think you should read this book too.
Right.
Right. And so it was, but is how I presented it. And so then what I also looked at is that if we're giving people little bits of information that they can just maybe pique their interest, then it's not saying they're like, because as we talked about before, our sphere of influence makes us our beliefs and the way that we look at the world.
For sure.
So if it's different than the way that we've seen the world, if they totally go against what our thoughts are, we might push them out. But if you give them little bits of information, then it might pique the interest and say, oh, interesting. So I once had a conversation, and I forget how it happened, but I was on the phone, and someone told me that First Nations people should get over it. And so what I've learned to do is share information and to try to start a different dialogue, right? And so what I said to him was that I said, did you know that First Nations people can't own their own land on reserve? I said, so the government's done that on purpose so they can't create equity in their properties or wealth and so forth.
Right.
And he goes, that doesn't make sense. That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
And he goes, and it was interesting because now he's mad that First Nations people can't own their land on reserve. and it changed it from a narrative to where he made a very racist comment,
Right.
and now he's learning, and I mean, I'm still learning every single day and having conversations with a lot of like really good people. But I think it's we all have to be open to, I guess, just listening,
Yeah,
right? A little
exactly.
bit
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, for sure. Good for you. I feel like even as you telling that story, Greg, I immediately felt triggered because I've heard that before as well. And I was just like, oh, it just drives me crazy.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, one of my best friends said to me, "I don't get treated the same way as you did." And the thing is, like, I've never like no one's ever been racist towards me,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I don't know what that feels like and so forth. And when my friends aren't respected,
Let's take it.
yeah, like when my friends aren't respected, I mean, I just never even saw that before, right? It was like it's almost like I was so naive, I didn't know that was even there,
Yeah,
right? So then I look at myself a little bit and go like, okay, why didn't I see that? But then I guess it just takes a long time to be able to kind of figure that out, and then to be able to be like, okay, so what's my role to play in this, right?
totally.
Because
Yeah.
I know that like as a white privileged male, which I had to learn what that even meant,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's just like, so where can we move to the future? Because a lot of things, the way that we did things when I was growing up in the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s was not socially acceptable and so forth. And within our society, even binge drinking was promoted,
Right.
right? Like
Yeah.
the more you drank, the cooler you were.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I could drink a lot, right? And the thing is, was I proud of it? I guess I was, because I was trying to be cool,
Right.
right? And that seems weird to say, but I mean that was a lot of like what, at least in Saskatchewan,
Yeah.
like what was pushed and so forth, right?
I grew up in BC.
Yeah.
Same. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
like that was the high school culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. So I guess I like through all this, I've just learned a ton. I mean, after doing the homeless challenge, I guess I was partnered with, so the way the homeless challenge works, kind of back to this a little bit, is that you're partnered up with one person
Okay. On the street.
on the street,
Okay.
so that you're going to then kind of walk through your experiences with this person. So it's a safety kind of place,
Makes
and to
sense.
have someone with you. So I was
Yeah.
partnered up with Alice Kuipers. So we had never met before, and we were also partnered up with her 8-year-old son. So not only were we seeing this for the first time, then I had an 8-year-old, and
Sorry. And who is Alice?
so
Like, what
yeah,
was
so
her?
Alice Kuipers is an author, and she writes children's stories, and she does a lot of, now she does coaching and so forth, and she's an amazing person, and so we, I guess, had a life-changing experience together. And then with her 8-year-old son there, it was just so different, because like you're now not caring about yourself anymore, you're caring about this child,
For sure.
right? And
Yeah.
you're looking at it differently.
So that brings me to one of the, I'm sure a lot of your friends probably have this issue as well. One of the big challenges, middle class and above, as a parent, is how do you let your kids know about the privilege that they have, but more importantly, like the needs of the community and what struggles other people in the community have. So I
Yeah.
think it's so interesting that Alice brought her 8-year-old son to be able to see this and experience this, right?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
like that's when I have, my daughter's 4 now, and I see that a lot of the things that built resilience in me, that helped me understood the world that I live in, that helped kind of define my lens that I view the world through and the community through, came through like hardship as a child in my teenage years and things like that. But she doesn't necessarily have that naturally built into her environment.
Right.
So I want to expose her. And I think a lot of people want to expose their kids and make sure that they're good community responsible members that understand what's going on and aren't sheltered wholly with their privilege.
Right.
So you want to expose them in a way that they understand. You don't want to traumatize them.
Right.
But you also want them to do some good value-added work in the community. Like, is there any organizations or kind of things that you'd recommend for that?
And I can just go off on kind of some different examples, but a lot of times I think just letting kids know that, you know what, there's some people that don't have as much as you do, and that is there certain items of your clothes that you'd like to donate, or certain toys and so forth, so that they can start understanding where other people are coming from, and you could probably take them to the charity to drop that stuff off.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think it depends on the family. It depends on your kids. And maybe it's not taking them to drop stuff off. Maybe it's just having that conversation. I know that when we did Operation Santa, a lot of families like kind of explained that kids didn't have as much as they did. And what they did is said, like, so when we did Operation Santa before, I mean, now Segan Dakota Dunes Community Development Corporation's taken it over. But what we did is that we would get the name of the kid, the age, and so then, but all the other information was blocked out to whoever's donating.
Right.
And so that at least you know what the kid's age was, the name of it, and the name of the kid, not it, and what they were interested in.
Yeah.
So then that kid then can go in and shop for someone and then feel like, oh, I'm helping this kid out and I'm doing this, and then giving it. So I think those are some of it. I know that we've had teachers use One Small Step to find different charities, and then do collective like fundraising, or even doing clothing drives and so forth.
Right.
There's not as many. I mean, the big factor is that you're not giving garbage to these organizations. Like when we sat down and we first came up with the thought process of One Small Step, it was about donating physical items, right?
Okay.
And what we realized that interviewing the charities, they said like 50% of what we get is garbage, and we have to spend a lot of time going through all of this stuff because people are just giving us garbage.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. And and so awareness is the number one thing that charities need. And so just sharing them on your social media and so forth, that's not directly for kids, but
no, but it's
but it's like, because a charity is only usually as strong as its network. So its board members are filled up of its network.
Right.
It's like its donations are filled up of its network. And unless they have massive connections, they're usually isolated to whoever they know.
right. Oh, it makes sense.
Right?
So that's a good segue into One Small Step. So we've chatted about it, mentioned it a few times.
Right.
What exactly is it, and what's the intention behind the work that it does?
So the intention was that I guess when I've learned that a lot of people don't know about these organizations, and just like I spoke about before, they're only known about with the network and through word of mouth. Right. And usually they don't have the resources and so forth, and they're usually in crisis. So the last thing they have time is to be able to update their websites, to be able to do SEO, and so people can find them, and then have money to do marketing and advertising. So this is just what I learned being on a couple of different boards. When we did the homeless challenge, after it was done, Allie, of course, wanted to give back to the places that supported us the most. So it was the YWCA, the Food Bank, the Friendship Inn, and the White Buffalo Youth Lodge. So she phoned those organizations. So this was the day after we did this this challenge, and it took her 4.5 hours, I think, for the charities to like figure out what they needed, and for her to then go like just to find out what they needed.
Right.
And so she shared this with me, and I had shared a video the following day. I woke up. Of course, you can see I was probably emotional over the whole scenario. And so I shared this video talking about racism and talking about all these different factors of like my experience. And so 300 people private messaged me and said, how do I help and what can I do? And I was like,
wow.
How do I know? I was like, man, I just finished the homeless challenge. I thought that was my job, right?
Yeah.
Like create awareness. This is what it was. And then we were sitting there and I was like, how can so many people want to help? But then the charities, like, I mean, they just don't have the resources. And they have people that care more than anything. But sometimes, like, just like we're sitting on the board, you think that everything's going to go great that month. And then everything goes differently than you planned because they're just dealing with crisis and people and trying to support them and meeting them where they're at.
The nature of their work.
They're just nature of their work, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like, if you heard some of these stories, like you would be absolutely blown away. And like, yeah, most people wouldn't judge as much if they knew what really was going on, right?
For sure.
So we saw this, and then I was like, what happens if we were able to connect those 300 people to the needs of the charities? And I was like, so then we started just having a conversation with like local nonprofits that we knew from the challenge and knew from just Caitlin and so forth.
Hmm.
And we're like, what happens if we built basically a resource that people could find out what to donate to you? And the idea, there was piqued some interest. So then we went and we did a workshop where we had, I think it was, I don't know, for some reason I think 12, but 10 to 12 charities.
Right.
And we had another probably 20, 25 community kind of people, First Nations and so forth, to give insight and to figure out kind of how to support these charities.
Right.
And so we did it. And the crazy thing is, I didn't realize this, but like everyone was like, it's amazing that every single charity showed up. Because the thing is, like,
Yeah.
they're always revolving, as I said, and having so much to do. For them to show up, it showed that this was like an idea that just might work.
Yeah.
And so then what happened is we all sat down together. And as a realtor, I look at it as like every single person, when they go to sell their house, needs to donate things, needs to give away things, needs to, like, their family members are
Hmm.
downsizing, or they just need to get rid of all this furniture. They don't know where to put it.
Right.
And I was like, man, there's so much good that could be given to people that don't have anything, right?
Right.
So when we sat down with the charities, they were like, actually, the donation side of it, like for the physical donations, the last thing. I was like, okay.
Interesting.
but
Yeah.
I mean, we're there to listen to what they wanted, right? And
Right.
it like, and then so then we started listening, and it was awareness, so being able to find them. Then it was like monetary donations, right? Then it was volunteers, and then it was those physical donations.
Okay.
But the physical donations took up most of their time, because 50% of what people are donating is garbage already, so they'd have to sort through it and so forth.
Right.
So if anything's got holes in it, if anything has like it, if you wouldn't wear it tomorrow, don't donate it.
Right.
Right? Throw it out.
Yeah. That's garbage.
Right?
Yeah.
It's garbage,
Yeah.
right? And I think some people would think, well, like, like they could use it. And I was like, they're people too. And at the same time,
Hmm.
their kid doesn't want to go to school with a ripped t-shirt or holy socks or the rest of it,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, again, I'm learning a lot of this. And so then we started looking at, okay, so maybe we can build out a resource that connects everybody to these charities. And we started with 12 charities that were mostly involved with Sanctum. And then from there, I guess it just kind of grew. And the thing is, it's kind of funny and not funny, is that we were building this out, and then COVID hit, and the resource couldn't be used because people couldn't volunteer, and they also couldn't donate anything.
Right.
So we were off to kind of not the greatest start, but I mean, there was a lot of people being like, wouldn't that have been a great resource if it was going? And I was like, yeah, thanks for the reminder, right? But
Yeah.
anyways, as we built this out, we're like, I think this is a model that can do all these different things. And so then we had it like sponsored by large corporations. And so we looked at it as like, okay, if we get the largest corporations in the community to be able to sponsor them, then it'll create more clout for this and so forth. And so what we did realize is like Co-op uses it to engage their employees to be able to find charities. Nutrien uses it, Blue Cross uses it, and so forth, right? Blue Cross was another sponsor and continuous sponsor. And so it's interesting that these large corporations that have these community engagement people had to find all these charities by themselves.
Right.
And so the thought on it is that you create something like this. It's almost like a Google search engine for charities.
Hmm.
And there's, I mean, a million different ideas that we can add and so forth. Like there's a lot of corporations looking for volunteerism. There's more engagement that we can get into. I want to add the community schools onto it and so forth.
Right.
Just because I think there's a lot of times people just don't know where to donate, and everybody has a different passion.
For sure. And like even just coming from the corporate perspective, we always have a budget. Most organizations have a budget every year. And because you're running a business or an operation, you're busy. So that money tends to get divvied up to one of two ways. One, you hear about it on the radio, like the food
Right.
bank is looking for donations, or the interval house, or whatever the case might be.
Yeah.
Or it's the most persistent people that are kind of like, you talk about all those layers of people that will kind of protect you from a lot of
Right,
extra
yeah.
phone calls. It's whoever's like persistent enough to
Right.
get through all of that to get your attention. And like, that's just, you know, that's just not a that's not a useful way of doing it. That's not a very strategic way of doing it. So I think just having, what's the website?
onesmallstep.com.
Okay.
So
simple to remember.
Simple to remember. We first started out with SK just because the URL was way too expensive. And then, but yeah, Jan Martel thought of the name One Small Step, and I think it's a great name. It's one small step to making a difference, or it's and I think so on there right now we have 65 charities.
Awesome.
And so I mean, just like any charity, I mean, we've been, as you build out stuff, like we all have our own jobs and the rest of it. So, and there's a lot of turnover because there's a lot of people that are growing their own things, right?
Right.
And so on there, it's like, we'll keep on building it. We'll keep on building something that I believe can be a household name that people can engage and make and support people within their own local community.
Yeah.
But it's also something that it's interesting when different cities started reaching out and saying, can we have a one small step in our community?
Right. Yeah. Like this model works.
I think like I have to, like, I'm always like, okay, we can build this and we can build that and then we can build this. I have to stay to right now, just like, okay, we need to make it a household name. We also need to build it out so that we have the ability to be able to find people that can work for us.
Right.
Because I mean, I have a different job. And the thing is that unless we've got people that are doing it on a daily basis, it can't grow to the potential that it can grow to.
Right.
And so then the way that we've done it is that we've only made it so that it's sponsorship based. And at first, what we wanted to do is that we didn't want to take any extra money because we didn't want to take it away from charities. But then what we've recently recognized is that, you know what, if we don't have money coming in, we won't exist.
Right.
Right. Because it costs money to be able to do our social media. It costs money to do the website side of things and so forth. Right.
For sure.
And so as we kind of grow it out, we're actually now going to take direct donations in the new year here to One Small Step, so that we can continue to build this out and make it so that we can support more charities and highlight them, right? Like, for example, we have a $10,000 a month Google grant. So we have $120,000 from Google, but you have to create the ad and then to be able to market it, which costs money for someone to be able to build and to do it, right? And so there is a cost to do the charity as well too, right? And so that's kind of, so I guess we're looking for donations still and sponsors to continue the I guess the vision of what we think can make impact. Because I think by showing and highlighting these charities, you can also tell the story of why these organizations exist in the first place.
What the problem is.
What is the problem?
The core need in the community.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I think that people need to start being a little bit more open-minded to just listening to those things rather than passing judgment. Yeah. And it's just a lot of learning, but being open to learning.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
I was just thinking too, like, that's a good thing for me and my daughter to sit on the computer one day and be like, hey, let's figure out what this charity needs. Let's go to this website, click what like, I'm not sure, I haven't played with it yet, but like what this charity needs. And then we can go get the food items that they're in need of, go get the baby formula that this organization is in need of. Like, that's also a good way of helping and teaching. For
sure. So you can just go on onesmallstep.com. There's a search bar right at the very top. You could put in formula and it'll tell you which charities are taking it. It'll hit their landing page, and then their landing page gives you basically a direct donation to that organization if you want to donate. We looked at it as like, we didn't want to take any money away from the charities. We didn't want to be the middleman. We just wanted to be the connector.
Yes.
Right. And so the thing is, but yeah, you can go on there. And what we found too is that when I was part of Haven, everybody would continue to say like, oh, Haven's for moms and children. And I was like, no, it's not. Right. So letting people know what those community organizations do, because they do so much more than what we think they do.
Right.
Right. Like if you look at what the food bank does, it's way more. So the food bank has a clothing depot. Yeah. So if you're going to donate clothes, don't go to Valley Village, donate directly to the food bank.
Okay.
right? So like those are things that I looked at. And when we did the homeless challenge, it only cost us $2 for full 3 items of clothes. So that was a sleeping bag, a jacket, and a sweater
Okay.
for $2. So that's somewhere where I would donate my like clothes rather
Yeah.
than Value Village, and I won't go into that spiel.
No, well, and that's good. Like, cause I take a
Yeah.
bag or two of clothing, like my daughter grows like a weed and
Right.
like just me, like, yeah. So we're constantly taking clothes to Value Village. That's a quick, easy change that we could make that just, yeah, I never put in the time and energy to find out.
And you could just also go into one small step and just say kids clothing, and it'll tell you which charity is taking kids clothing as well too.
Fantastic.
So it's kind of, so the concept and the idea just keeps on getting built out, and it really is a community initiative that like hundreds and thousands of people have been part of. It's I mean, yeah, I feel honored to be part of it.
Yeah, it's fantastic work, Greg. I think it's going to change the way that those organizations operate and like the level of awareness around them. I think it's really powerful. And I think if the corporate space can find out a little bit more about it, that when we're doing a lot of our campaigns, whether it's our holiday campaign or at the beginning of the year, we're kicking off or whatever the case might be, when we're trying to find out, we have resources, whether it's in employee hours, dollars, whatever it is, we can go to this place and find out exactly what our community needs and at what point.
It's interesting. So the other thing that I was thinking too is that when people start volunteering at these organizations, you start seeing things differently.
Right.
And so then when people's employees or companies' employees start volunteer and it becomes their maybe charity of choice, then maybe things will start changing because those CEOs will then have different conversations with public leaders and so forth. So
Yeah.
I honestly believe these large corporations that are worth billions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars, these people have more pull to make positive change within our community than anyone else.
Without a doubt.
Like, I mean,
big business has the ability to change the world more so than anybody else.
They do. And that's like, I look at it as like, when we started looking at this and you go, okay, I want to support kids. How do I support kids? Well, to support kids, you have to support the family. Support the family, you have to then support the charities that support the family. Then you look at it and you're like, okay, governance or the public need to support so then the government needs to support those charities, but the only way that the government's going to do that is if the the large corporations then push them to do that.
Yeah, make it a priority.
But then at the same time, I mean, they could be matching, they could be doing other things with it as well too.
Yeah,
right?
they also have.
I've said
big
that
budgets.
a lot better before, but like, yeah, that's basically the idea behind it.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for like coming on and like, first of all, doing this work. I think it's just so powerful and so important. And I don't know many people that have taken it on in the way that you have. And just, yeah, thank you for coming on and sharing your story and all of the work with One Small Step.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks for sharing with your audience, and then hopefully we'll make more of an impact within our community.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome.
Thank you.